All right, B, you may begin.
Thank you. Thank you. Welcome to January 31st, 2021 meeting of Community Board 6 Bylaws Committee. My name is B. Disman. I am chair of the committee. This meeting is called to order at 6:33 p.m. Tonight we have with us the district manager, Jesus Perez. Members of the public, you can raise any questions or comments that you have through the Q&A feature of Zoom. If there's time following the committee's discussion, we'll field questions from the public. At this point in time, I need a member of the committee to take minutes tonight, and they would be under the format that was sent out by the committee chair and Jesus this morning. So can someone raise their hand to take minutes? They're brief and concise.
Yeah,
We see.
I'll take minutes. I don't know if you heard me. Sorry.
Okay, thank you, Sandra. Okay.
And what time do we call it? At
6:33. 6:33. Okay. Jesus, if you would take attendance, please, to ensure we have a quorum.
Sure. All right, I will now call your name. When you hear your name, please answer present. Keep in mind that the way my computer is set up, I cannot see your screens, so I will need you to audibly call out. B. Disman.
Present.
Thank you. Adam Hartke.
Present.
Thank you. Seema Shah cannot join us tonight. Sean Sherman. Excuse me. Sean Sherman. Okay, I do not hear Sean. Sandro Sherrod.
Present.
Thank you. Maura Wong.
Present.
Thank you. With 4 members present, we have quorum.
Thank you. The agenda for tonight's meeting was distributed ahead of time by the board office and appears on the screen before you. And we will put it up. If there's no objection, we'll adopt the agenda as stated. Members of the committee, if you object to adopting the agenda, you may raise your hand through Zoom. Seeing no objection, the agenda is adopted. So I want to discuss how we conduct an efficient meeting. We need to observe a few ground rules. No one may speak unless granted by the floor. Committee members, if you have a question about committee business or wish to make a motion, please raise your hand through Zoom. The chat function should not be used for committee business or questions about agenda topics. All such remarks should be made on the record by raising your hand through Zoom. Chat can only be used to alert us to any technical difficulties you are having or to state in writing information like an email address that already stayed aloud on the record during the meeting. When a committee member is given the floor to speak, I will identify you and you can unmute yourself so that you could speak. And I'm going to ask Jesus to help me because with my computer, I won't see when people raise their hands. We are required by New York State law to have a transcript of the meeting, so please keep your questions and comments succinct and germane to the discussion. The order of the adopted agenda is being followed. So we're going to start with the first subject on the agenda, but before I put that on the agenda, and I'll talk more about it under new business, I just want to recognize that all of us certainly expressed our comments about the death of Rick Eckers. Rick was always involved in bylaws, and as a matter of fact, I would go to Rick for discussions about bylaws and had the opportunity to discuss that with Rick before he went in for his surgery and his untimely death. So I just want to recognize that over the years, he made substantial contributions, to the bylaws of Community Board 6. And as a matter of fact, when we talk about the notes about the executive committee recommendations in a while, a lot of those come from Rick that he was able to communicate to Carl. So I just want the record to reflect that his opinions and thoughts will be expressed in what we have from the executive committee. And I have another question when we get to new business. So I was thinking the first item that I have for the agenda is discussion of, it's basically an organizing discussion of how we go ahead and deal with the bylaws. And certainly I have actually read the bylaws, which we was all sent to you of all the Manhattan community boards, as well as the bylaws themselves, as well as the recommendations by the executive committee. And when I looked at them, there are actually sections of the bylaws that I think can be handled by individual committee members in reporting to the group. And I thought rather than each one of us reporting on all the bylaws, we should all have read them and read everything. If we take responsibility for sections of them, it would make our work process go more smoothly. My intent from talking to Kyle is to have the bylaws recommendations to the full board by June, if it's doable. And so it's the question of how we organize. So let me just tell you, in reading the community boards of Manhattan, the recommendations from the executive committee and our own bylaws, I thought there were 5 sections that we could organize around. One is membership. The second one is election of officers and duties and responsibilities. The third is board and executive committee meetings and committee meetings. The fourth is internal board operations, the role of the employees, the role of the district manager. And the fifth is miscellaneous, which are all like the general sections. So I throw that proposal out to all of you as to whether you have any thoughts about how we would organize efficiently. And I would say if you have a particular interest in this section, to let me know. Otherwise, I would just assign the section. So any thoughts by any of the people that are here? Any objection?
Just a question. Are you looking for us to identify at this point in time our specific topic areas that we're interested in, or just general agreement with the
general
approach?
Agreement that each committee member will have a topic to do the work on and then report back to the committee and would handle that part of the discussion.
Okay, I'm in agreement.
I am too. I think these are good delineations.
Adam, since I didn't hear from you, any thoughts?
I concur.
Okay, fine. So what I'm going to ask you to do, I will send everyone a note with the subjects I just articulated. If you have one that you're interested, if you could let me know within the next 2 days. Otherwise, I will just assign them. And Sima said she would take whichever one, people weren't interested in or to deal with. Thank you. I think that works very well. All right, the next item that's on the agenda is the recommendations that came from the executive committee. And Carl had asked the executive committee members to send to him recommendations, as many of the members had seen how the bylaws had operated. A number of people had been there through the prior bylaw discussions, and what areas that they thought would be very important to function on the bylaws. So I've asked Jesus to put up the executive committee recommendations that was sent to all of you. And I don't know if any of you have any specific comments on those recommendations that you would like to make today. Can everyone see them?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Anyone have any thoughts or comments? I want to see if anyone has anything. I did not get my comments to the executive committee, but I will add one more afterwards. But any thoughts from anyone? Okay, let me just go quickly, if we can scroll through it. The first one was the need for reorganization. And it really dealt with the issue of, is the chair authorized to speak on behalf of the board? And is the use of resolutions the real policy of the board? And so that has always been a debate within members of the community board, and I see it was certainly spoken about by the executive committee. The next one, which was Article 2. Who says? Okay, Article 2 has been something that I've looked at for years, And it's really, what are the duties of some of the officers, okay? For example, you know the duties of the secretary, you know the duty of the treasurer. You even know the duty of the assistant secretary, as we've seen at many meetings. The assistant treasurer was actually started when we had a lot of difficulties. This was before Jesus came, and we had a lot of difficulties in straightening out the finance of the community board. But right now, most of that comes from the Office of Management and Budget. And so the question is whether you still need an assistant secretary. Then we all get into the questions of who is a parliamentarian? Does everyone think they're a parliamentarian? And should there be qualifications? I'm just going to skip to one that's always been a question, is what are the roles of the vice chairs? Should they be given more responsibility? Can a vice chair also be a committee chair? And I think that's always a question that we have. And then should there be some additional positions that the chair can name to the executive committee? So anyone have any generic comments? But these are things that the board has struggled with. Certainly the role of the first vice chair and some of the other positions. Any thoughts?
Sandra, you're muted.
I could tell I'm muted.
Yeah,
Someone muted
I'm
me.
glad someone could call them because I can't see people. Okay.
Sorry, Sandra, I had to mute you because I heard click, 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 click.
Yeah, I can change the noise suppression. I have a separate mute button that I hit, so when I don't hit it, I don't know that I'm muted until someone tells me. So I think these are excellent topics that we definitely have had come up again and again over the years. And it would be interesting to put further detail around what is intended by either roles or statements that we make to the public and how those take form. I just want to think about, one, not only how do we improve the clarity of the document so that everyone has a clear and common understanding of what is intended, but also how we address things that are not bylaws specific. Some of this, bylaws are essentially a constitution, and of course you have some rudimentary principles, but the actual regulations or policies beyond the bylaws that might help add much more clarity to some of this is something that we should also think about undertaking, because some of this might be beyond the scope of just the bylaws document.
So I think, Sandra, you make the point, and Rick and I had a big discussion about this, sitting on a park bench at Dow Hamilton Plaza. And the question is, what are operating principles or more details that you need? And what is the structure of the bylaws, which is really the constitution of the community board? And there are pros and cons both ways, okay? And if it doesn't become part of the bylaws, where is this document that then describes what the operating principles will be? So I think that's a very important discussion for us, and thank you for articulating it, because you've seen it operate throughout the years. Anyone else want to comment on this section?
Because I'm so new to the board, I'm wondering if there is any kind of repository of notes from previous bylaws discussions that we might look to understand the arguments that have been made thus far.
So I have to ask Jesus the question. The last bylaws were updated, Jesus, how many years ago? And do we have minutes?
We should have minutes from those meetings. I will have to dig them up and then can post them online if we have them, and I can let the committee know once they're up there.
Okay, thank you. That's a great suggestion. Thank you. And do you know about how many years, or Sandra, do you remember how many years?
I feel like the last time we made any substantive changes to the bylaws were in 2017, but I think in the bylaws document, it actually says it at the very end, if I recall.
Okay.
I could pull that up in a second.
It's at least 4 or 5 years ago.
Yeah. And I think I might have some notes from even before that when we reviewed them in after I became chair, probably in 2012. I don't remember if there was any substantive changes between those two.
Okay. All right, let's go on to the next section. And elections, okay. So I think we saw at this meeting, at this year, that someone didn't run for the position of assistant secretary. And you know, there is articulation in the bylaws on that. There were a number of questions that the election committee had about nominations itself. When can someone sustain from it? And also acclamation. And then the other thing with elections that I just want to throw, when I looked at the other community boards in Manhattan, you know, we have an election for a year. And we have the election that we put the nominating committee in August. And basically it has to be presented in the September meeting in the slate, and we vote in October. But you have a lot of new members to the board that come up in May who really never get to know who the candidates are. So in looking at the dates of the elections, different community boards have different dates for elections. And so, you know, when we talk about ideas from members, that's something we should be looking at. Is this the most efficient way? And also, new members generally don't even know then who they're voting for. And also, a number of the boards had 2-year terms of office, as opposed to the 1-year term of office. And they had a maximum of 4. We have a maximum of 3. So I think there's a lot with elections that we could be talking about. Anyone else have any thoughts now? And I think this will be a meaty subject when we split it out. Any other thoughts?
I will comment. I noticed at the election this year, the bylaws do state that each candidate has an opportunity to speak. I don't recall Kyle or anyone inviting that to happen. And I feel like even if we don't change the dates, but I think that's a very good idea to do that, that we need to stress that there should be some kind of public component to the candidates voicing why they want to run for that position.
So I've seen it more different ways. I've seen it candidates themselves wanting to present themselves. And certainly when 2 candidates are running, we've definitely have had that. But yeah. I think it's an important point to raise and to emphasize, and we should be talking about it. Thank you. Adam, any comments?
No, I agree with your assessment so far. I can see this being a very sort of meaty topic. I do agree that it's worth considering potentially pushing those out a little, the elections out a little bit further, just to allow new members a chance to sort of absorb, you know, community board business, and just to get a bit to better know the candidates as a whole. And the 2-year term limits sound, or excuse me, the two-year terms does sound interesting. You know, that kind of meshes up with something like in Congress, or, you know, something along those lines.
Okay, so I think, you know, I think this gives a sense as we subdivide these categories, what the meaty issues will be for the person handling it to do. Okay, Sandra, do you have anything, or?
I was just going to say, it looks like 2014 was the time we actually adopted changes to the bylaws, and I might have some notes, but I was also going to recommend that in addition to the other boards' bylaws, that we all take an opportunity to familiarize ourselves with the city charter, specifically chapters. I think it's 69 and 70, which deal with community boards and districts. Yeah,
you're right. It's chapter 7 of the 70 of the New York City Charter. And then we do have also chapter 47, which is the, you know, freedom of information chapter, the open meetings chapter. And so I think we can send you, Jesus sent me the references. We can make sure every board member has it. And it really is interesting with the intent behind that. Yeah, so thank you for reminding us.
69, I think, is community districts, which not directly the board.
I meant to say 70. Sorry.
Yeah, no, 69 and 70. I think both of them have portions that we might want to reflect upon.
Thank you. Okay, let's go to the next one. which is actually,
Continuation of the elections chapter, which wasn't all, we weren't able to see it all on one screen.
oh,
So
okay. So that actually, talks about the mechanism of stuff. And it talks about the workings of the committee. Okay, let's go to the next one, which is item 4, which is terms of office. And I think we would combine that with one other thing to get it done. But there is a question of whether there should be limits of committee chairs, okay? With a 10-year limit on members, there's a real question about, is this significant or not? Should there be a term for committee leadership and for board officers? And a 1-year term with a maximum of 3 consecutive terms for officers of the board is too short. And that's what I was actually talking about myself. So I think that we've touched on this, and I think it's important pieces of things to deal with. All right, while we go on to the executive committee, and I think you've seen with the executive committee, Carl has tried to define what it is. I think you can see there are questions about should the committee have proxy. Now, it's interesting with the personnel committee, there had been a number of times personnel committees reporting to the executive committee. I had been on it, Sandra had been on it, okay? Jesus, I think you worked with the personnel committee for a while, okay? It was very important when there were specific personnel issues, and it's also important for performance, but we need to have a discussion about this. And then there was the question of the mentoring program and other things that people might think of for the executive committee. So I don't know if anyone has any thoughts just looking at the executive committee.
I have a question actually about the personnel committee. I think my tenure here on the board has been pretty, I don't think there's really been any immediate personnel issues, outside of a few hirings. So prior to that, was it more of a standing committee or was it just sort of ad hoc?
It was set up as a committee because the board did have, even with this small number of employees, Adam, the board did experience problems, okay? And in dealing with the problems, you had to deal with the borough president's office and the personnelists there. And you really needed people in the community board who had experience with managing personnel and also managing union contracts, which defined it. So you are right, you would assume in a smaller office as this situation, you wouldn't need it, but there were a period of a couple of years that the personnel committee was really involved in the issues and using the borough president's office as a legal foundation for issues. So it could be an ad hoc committee called upon as situations arrive, or it could be defined. I think there's different ways of going with the personnel committee.
Yeah, because I mean, even in a glass half full scenario, just of needing to hire new people or things of that nature, less so having to deal with problems, just having a sort of a firm, I guess, process for that, it would also be very helpful.
Yeah, well, a firm process for that, and the whole question of equity and discrimination and ensuring that your interview process is fair and what you do.
Sure.
It's a safety valve. And it's really helpful if you have real problems. I mean, that's based on my professional experience. And I think many of us saw it on the community board years and years ago. Okay, any other questions? Okay, and then
quickly before we go on, I just want
Sure.
to say that I had not heard about the mentor program at any point yet since I started. So
How long have you been a member?
this is my first term year,
Yeah.
so it's only been 6 months or something since
Yeah, I don't
spring.
think we've done it recently, sadly, since we started meeting virtually.
it wasn't done this year. We're going to try and put something together for the new folks. That's what Kyle is planning. But by that point, we'll probably have new folks, so we may just do them all together.
Yeah, and so we did have a really, I think, strong mentor program. Claude was involved in a lot of it, as were a lot of other people. I think, as you said, Maura, the question is you came during the Zoom and the separation. And I think not only not knowing us, but you also missed the fact of a little more formal structure. So I think it's a question of formal, should we make it formal and set up a course and a requirement? I think that's a good question. Okay. And then the next items deal with notice. And I think you can see they're process driven. And I don't think too much more has to be said. I think that can be looked at. Then about the resolutions during the summer is always a problem. And then I personally always thought that public members should live, work, or have a vested interest in the community. So I find that strange that this came up. And then this is an issue that we had over the years. I think you see what the time frame is for dealing with people off the board by not attending. Since we've been going virtual, it's been a little different. But again, this is a significant issue when people don't participate. So I think we should actually really think about what does participation mean? Any thoughts?
Related to that is something in the bylaws that I read, which deals with when one has a right to vote in a meeting, which conflicts with when one is counted as present at a meeting. And I believe it's that if you are at the meeting at any point, whether you miss the first or second roll call, you can still vote, but you are not counted as being present unless you're there for both.
Right.
That just seemed incongruous to me. And I think we might want to consider looking at that further.
Yeah, I think the question, the second, there wasn't always 2 roll calls. And what had happened, and I think Sandra could probably have a better memory than I, people would duck out before the end. So it really was to keep people there, as you can imagine.
That never happened, but that is probably the reason why that we would not want that to happen.
Yeah, so I think there's all those issues, but I think it's going to be worth talking about.
Mara, if I may, Mara is mentioning section 6 to C2 of the bylaws. And I'm glad she mentioned it, because this is something that I noticed when I first got on the board, and I'd mentioned it to several chairs, but sort of no one really did anything about it because people were happy with the status quo. Effectively, it says that if you are at full board and you are not there for either one of the roll calls, you are effectively absent that day. But that's not at all how we've ever done it. I imagine people would get upset if we did it that way. If he is correct that,
as someone who missed the first one, I would feel that way.
she is correct that it treats attendance and voting as separate.
Separately.
I never necessarily thought it as incongruous, but one can. But essentially, you will be absent, but you will still be allowed to vote if you are present for when the votes are called. But yeah, I mean, and what I told chairs is like, look, you guys write these, and however whether you want to have a strict one or a lenient one, that is up to you. But maybe if we're going to have a strict one, but not ever adhere to it, maybe let's just have a lenient one, or let's start adhering to the strict one, or whatever. But yeah, I'm very happy that Maura brought that up, because that's something I'd been sort of wondering about for years, and we just stopped wondering about it because everybody was so happy with the status quo. But yes, she's correct. Technically, we do not follow that part of the bylaws for the letter.
Thank you, Jesus. Okay, and let's go to the duties of the district manager. Okay, so this goes to the issue of more authority to hire and fight without board intervening. And this is one where Rick was actually involved in a number of the issues that we had, and worked with the attorneys in the borough president's office. If they determined it really was board approval. So we could discuss this more, but there was a lot of legal discussion as to who the district manager works for, and it's really the board approval. So Jesus, you actually were involved in a lot of these discussions. Do you want to make any comments?
Not any right now. I mean, if this turns into a very in-depth discussion, I'd be happy to offer my experience. But unless this needs to be, if this is just a high-level discussion right now, I don't think I need to say anything about this unless anyone has any questions.
Okay, so let me leave this. Every time we go to this vote, there's always this question of why do we have to do this? So know that this is a question that a lot of people have. So I think this is the last of what we have from the executive committee. So I was going to ask anyone here, remember, we're going to come back with more details, but does anyone here, after we've done all this, have anything that you want to raise for the good of the committee? I don't see anyone's hand.
I'm speaking a lot, but there were a lot of smaller things that I noticed or had questions about. And I'm wondering if, for the benefit of this group, if we each did some kind of track changes in a Word document of the bylaws and shared that with
Absolutely.
one another, we can understand where each of our heads are and what our questions are, instead of going through them line by line in a meeting.
So I think when you start having everyone doing track changes, it becomes a little difficulty. But I think for our next meeting, if someone can highlight their principal issues, not the editing stuff, because I did notice some of it on a lot of editing that can take place on the document. But I think it would be, in my own personal opinion, I've worked with a lot of track changes and you never know who it's coming from and what it means. So I think we should identify it. What other items? This is the executive committee. I think you have the committee here. And then I was going to ask another question and you opened that more. Should we solicit input from the board itself? You have a number of people on the board that have seen various bylaws that have not yet been given an opportunity to offer their suggestions. Should we do a quick survey? This way they will reread or read the bylaws so that they can raise some questions. I just would love the thoughts, and it goes a little along with what Maura was talking about. What are people's thoughts?
The specific topics that we just reviewed that have been brought up, that was just by the executive committee? Not
That's just the
full-
executive
okay.
committee, right?
I agree that I think we would want to entertain additional items. However, I'm just going back to the track changes comment. I think it's important that we track change. I completely agree, though, that a single document that multiple people are editing is really hard. But for example, if I'm very interested in pretty much everything, I think, in the bylaws, but if I wanted to just pick a couple, like let's say Article 1 or Article 2, that I'm going to be responsible for reviewing, it might be helpful for me to mark up comments that are applicable or that I've either heard or that I think might be germane to the conversation, and then we can review those together, as opposed to having a single track changes document. That, you're right, I think that would just be kind of hectic and crazy to go through. But if as like the champion of Article 1, let's just hypothetically say someone wanted to send over requests to look at specific items and maybe help also, not just every single board member sending a long list, but specific topics that they'd like to address, and maybe references to where they think it might be a better match to what our needs are. I think that might be a better way to filter and manage the potential deluge of content that might be coming all of our ways, just to look at specific articles.
Well, I think before I call on Sean, because I did see him pop up, I actually think the person's responsibility for this section should do as you articulated, Sandra, because you can get that gets input of other committee members. But I really think we want transparency. There's a lot of people on the board that have worked on going back to 2014, or there wasn't a board attempt to do bylaw changes at one point. So there's been a lot of history with what has taken place. And I think it's important for transparency. We may get a lot of the same because it tends to be the same issues that people are concerned with. They won't do the nitty-gritty. Anyway,
Sean, I have a
Sean,
suggestion on how to do it.
Huh?
After Sean, I have a suggestion on how to do that.
Okay, Sean, welcome.
Sure. I'm so sorry I'm late. I thought I was starting at 7. I got here promptly at 7. I apologize. But no, I do think that getting full board, as many people as possible, to get buy-in is really important. I don't have a specific suggestion on how. It sounds like Sandra does. I also, I don't know if this came up, and I apologize because I was late. Was there any discussion of like friendly amendments, which appear to be a constant issue of when they can and cannot happen?
Not a thing. That's in a made-up term. Sorry.
Okay.
Yeah, that's
well,
Yeah.
so that is
So maybe it's just worth
term-
clarifying, because it does seem, in my very limited experience, to be a constant thing that comes up.
So I actually also pulled Robert's
I will take
rules.
that on. I
Huh?
will be happy to write some language
You can write
around.
the language,
Yeah,
because
I
I
will be
actually
happy
went
to
to
do that.
Robert's rules also to look at
Yeah.
that language. And it's the community board did it out of many, many years ago. Instead of having these long debates of 1 or 2 words, the chair of the committee would accept, quote, from the floor, this amendment, and it was a friendly amendment. But when we got into the part that they didn't want to accept it, that even got to be longer debates. So, but we can put that in as a subject. Okay. So Sandra, what's your idea of soliciting?
I was just going to suggest that I can work with the board office to either create like a Google form or an Airtable that allows people to make specific suggestions based on an article, so
Right.
that we can then filter it and then see the 10 suggestions that came in for the article that we're going to be researching a little bit faster.
Yes, because I actually went through all the articles, and I was going to say you set it up exactly the same way, except for the 1 or 2 that are miscellaneous general statements
Right.
in the bylaws. But you'd go to the heart of it. It would be wonderful if you can work with the office and we could send something out. I think getting the concerns of the board members are very important for all of us. Because I think we don't want this to be something that is closed. I think it's better received transparent, and people have ideas, and I think we should hear from them. Okay, so we'll take that on as an action item. Okay, anything else before I go to the date and frequency of the meeting? And something I wanted to ask before I go to that, because Rick was a member of the committee, we had 1 additional person working with us, and someone in addition to Sandra and myself who had experience on looking at bylaws in the past. Should I make a request of Kyle to select someone additional, or do you feel the size of us as a committee can deal with this task? I welcome any comments.
6 in number, right?
It's 6 in number. It's usually good to have an odd number. I mean, thoughts?
I
Just
feel
leave
like
it as it is?
we might ask him if there's someone who he thinks could fill the role successfully.
I think it's good to have an odd number as well. I agree with that, as you know.
All right, why don't I ask Kyle, if no one objects,
Sure.
if he wants to appoint someone to, add to the committee. And because we basically did an organizing today, and I think it would be helpful. More diverse opinion is very helpful when you're dealing with this, because by reading words and the practice, they tend to be different, okay? Okay, so the last item on it, yeah, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Sorry, it does look like Anne has requested the floor.
Okay.
Anne is here as a guest. Do you wish to allow her the floor?
Yes, we can. Anne? Is your mic on?
And just
I
for
believe
those watching at home, Anne Seligman is a member of this board, but not on this committee. She is attending this committee as a guest, and you have the floor.
Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, B. And thank you, B. And just like kudos for these questions and this issue analysis. I think you you did a brilliant job on it. So I just had a few thoughts that came up either while I've been thinking about it or listening. Some of these came up, but there are times when the committees or full boards have conflicts of like, we can't do that because the bylaws don't allow it. And like, we've heard that. We've heard a couple of examples like the friendly amendment. And mostly they're Article 1 things. And I'm just wondering if we have any way to kind of capture those things so we can kind of identify and clarify them. Um, and also, you referred to Robert's rules, and they are, I believe, referenced as a governing principle. Um, so I think we need to just, as everybody is going through the changes that you're considering, to be aware of how the changes might conflict with those. And if they do conflict, maybe that's okay, but I think we need to be explicit about it. Um, the second question, and I remember this from the last time we changed the bylaws, is whether they are would be voted on as a package or as individual items. And obviously, the more efficient thing is to do it as a package, but I think that can also be problematic. So I would offer as a suggestion, perhaps the changes to each article are kind of each a resolution.
Yeah.
Um,
So,
that's
and thank you. I think that's something I was going to put a little later when we see what the changes are on how we present this.
okay.
And we'll take the recommendation. I also think it would really be good as we going through the committee for the number of months, as we hear issues that we can't do this because of X, Y, and Z, we keep track of that and let that fall into what we're doing. And I
Great.
think there is a nice opportunity for people, to offer suggestions as we go along. I want to make this as open a process as possible. But I will tell you also, you don't want to spend in passing bylaws 10 or 15 hours on going through the sections. So we'll have to figure out collectively as a group what's the most effective way. And if there are radical changes or changes that we're proposing that really would change the structure and do a lot, we'll have to take those up in a different manner and start talking about it.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your stuff, and we'll be very comfortable inviting other board members as they hear us soliciting comments if they wish to be guests and stuff. I think it's important to hear from everyone. Thanks, Sam.
Okay. And so I just had like I agree about like track changes not being necessarily the way, it can just be too confusing. I love the idea of, an Airtable or something. Anything that will encourage kind of more eyes on each section, I think is really helpful. And part of me is like, if other board members are super interested in the changes, they should come to the meetings. Like, that's why I'm here. I think these things matter. And so, I mean, I think it's great if there's outreach, but I also think it's kind of up to people. I mean, maybe we just need to really make sure people realize it's going on. And maybe if you decide you need a new member, I might be a little too OG for it, but I'd be happy to do it. So I do think it's a really important issue. So anyway, that's the end of my comments.
Thanks, Dan. Appreciate it very much. Thank you. Okay. So let me go to the fact of frequency of committee meetings, selecting a date and having it. If we assign subject matter, to everyone, to look at and to work through, and we solicit comments, is a meeting frequency once a month, work through the issue. And in addition to once a month, if we choose, we'd have to choose a date that there aren't other committee meetings on. So Jesus would have to schedule, we'd have to look at the schedule, but what is the frequency that you would kind of feel comfortable with, assuming everyone has an area that you're going to take responsibility for and report on? Go ahead. I can see you, Sandra.
All right. Sorry, I do want to speak out of turn. I was just thinking, so I think that effectively means 4 meetings, because if I recall, you said you
Right.
were thinking a
For
document
June.
to be tendered would be in June. I feel like 4 might be a little too small a number, just because we haven't really figured out which articles or which portions we want to identify. But if we can figure that out fairly fast, I think 4 might actually work. But we should probably strategically plan out then by the 1 month from now, initial review of the comments with other committee members that for each of those articles. And then at a subsequent one, maybe some actual changes based on our conversation. And then those following 2, I would imagine we'd have to do more of a review because there's probably going to be a good portion of items to go through in a single meeting. But if we're going to ratify it by the 4th internally, I would just want to make sure that we're kind of trending along, going over all the sections, going over all the comments, and having a thoughtful response, whether or not it's something we're changing or something that we as a group think that it is maybe best to leave, or however we end up addressing those individual comments. I just want to, if we're asking for multiple board members to give us lots of information, I'd like to respond in some way so that we're not perceived as ignoring anything.
So do you think the next meeting, because we're going to do a lot of work before the next meeting, could be at the end of February? And then looking at the subjects, that would have to be a real working meeting,
Yeah.
going through and deciding what we're doing. And from there, kind of decide what the frequency is, if we need to wrap it up. I think it's fair to try to do this by June.
Okay.
Unless people feel that they want to take more time, I said the gut of June. Tell me what people are thinking.
So actually, I guess this is a question of process. So would this, in terms of ratifying it, would it take 2 meetings, basically it being read in 1 meeting and then voted on another underneath like
No,
the
it would
amendment?
be how you present it to, the real issue is you present it
Okay.
as a package, the way we do the budget,
Sure.
or do you present it as individual sections? Okay.
Okay. So this wouldn't, so the process wise, this wouldn't be an amendment. This would be just like a resolution.
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
And depending on how great the change is, will cause a number of issues. This in itself can take almost the whole meeting, of the
Totally.
community board. And
May I ask?
I agree with Ann. Bylaws is very significant for an organization. It's the process by which they're driven. And so I think people need to take the time to understand what they are.
Sure. May I ask just what exactly would be an amendment? If this isn't an amendment, like what would exactly be an amendment?
Well, I have to go and actually talk to people with experience. You would present the changes to the bylaws through a resolution, I
Okay.
think, that gets ratified.
So the bylaws actually have a process where amendments are made through a motion
Right.
that is presented to the board, and then the motion cannot be voted on at
Right.
that same meeting. It has to be at the next meeting immediately following. So make sure that everyone has had time to fully read it. Yep, there it goes.
Yeah, because I was reading this, because in my mind, I understand like this being sort of passed as like a budget resolution and maybe not going through the amendment process. But then at the same time, though, if what we're doing aren't amendments, then what exactly would be an amendment? Sorry to be so circuitous here in the way that my brain's thinking, but I'm just opening up.
Well, let me take a thing. An amendment would be, for example, that an officer of the board can also chair a committee.
Okay.
An amendment could be, we are eliminating the position of assistant treasurer.
Adam, maybe
And
the simpler answer is an amendment is a change to this document. Is that
Mhm.
what you're?
Amendment is a substantial change.
Yeah.
Got it. And so in theory,
Because-
we wouldn't be making substantial changes.
In theory, you would be, if you eliminate positions, if you change the way you're meeting, if you change the authorities of people, those are substantial changes.
Yeah, because those are some of the questions that were asked earlier, you know, the roles of some of the executive positions, you know, do we need them? Like, so if we decided within this effort, we don't need, for example, let's just say we don't need an assistant treasurer anymore, you know, would that qualify as an amendment as opposed to just a change in the bylaws?
I think any change is an amendment, you know,
Yeah.
from this perspective, anything that's substantive, right? So it's not, there's an errant comma, but we're modifying the intent or the meaning of a sentence or a role, or expanding or further defining. I think all of those would be classified as amendments. I don't think there is another change process for the bylaws.
Okay.
So I'm hearing what Adam's saying and Sandra. So you think it's really too ambitious to try to do this, given?
I don't think it's too ambitious. I mean, I think we should definitely strive for being an efficient and effective group. I would just say that maybe in a month's time after we've had a chance to look through this, and I definitely will be working through this well before a month from now. But if there's you know, an April checkpoint and we feel like we're not meeting our target, we either increase our frequency for kind of that critical path to getting it to the board for a potential adoption in June, or we look at changing the potential you know, report time frame.
Mhm.
So just to be clear, because the office needs to be very clear about the timeline for calendaring purposes. If the goal is to pass these things at the June, these amendments at the June full board, according to section 13 of
It would have to be presented in May.
it would have to be presented in May. And then, but I'm reading it sort of, a motion has to be made in May, but the text would actually have to be presented until the next full board. And so you guys would need to be done more or less by May. And then the June being, if it happens to the June meeting of this committee, if it happens to happen before June's full board, will then be, I guess, just to wrap up any loose any final details and stuff, I guess.
Yeah, so I actually think I'm going to Sandra's comment. We need to get ourselves working on the sections. I need to get ask you to get to me by close of business tomorrow, which sections. I'll send out the sections. Just send me back a response, what you'd like to do. We'll get that to you. And then if you can all start working on it, because I actually think, listening to the time of getting this by May, and the board meets the second Wednesday of May, and then the second is very aggressive, okay? But I think we should hold ourselves to that standard, and let's see what we start talking about as the changes, okay?
Is it going to be possible to put together an Airtable, let's say by next Wednesday, which is our full board meeting? Because I assume then with this aggressive schedule, we'd want to announce that to everyone next week.
Well,
so that we can start soliciting.
I'm looking at Sandra and Jesus to see if they could do it. And I think so, because I think you know the subjects. You just take them out of the bylaws.
I would want to talk with Sandro just real quick about what he envisions exactly, and then we can put it together pretty quickly. Whether you guys want to deploy it at next full board or the one after, that's for you guys to sort out. But
yeah, no, I actually think it'd be good, Jesus, to get it out, you know, so we even can talk about it at the full board, what we're trying to do. I know I said to you, you know, I wanted to wait, I didn't want to report, but I think we have enough if we're doing this to say that we'll be sending it and we want people to look at the bylaws, you know, and to actually give their opinions. I think we need to verbalize that at a board meeting. So if everyone doesn't disagree, I will have you guys starting to work on it. I think it's easy to do. I could actually even help you. I'm not the technocrat, but I can help you with the subjects, Sandra.
Okay.
Okay. Okay, so I'm just going to go to any other new business.
Is this committee going to choose a date for the next meeting now, or will that come later? I will say that the first Wednesday of the month is free if you guys want it. That would be a sort of regular night that we can always reliably count on to be available for this committee. Is that something that will work? That would mean, though, that the first Wednesday of February, probably you would not meet then because that's in a couple of days. But if you wanted to start in March, Wednesday, March 2nd would be your next meeting, and then it would be April, Wednesday.
As long as it's not April 1st, I'm fine.
Wednesday, April 6th, and then it would be Wednesday, May 4th, and then it would be Wednesday, June 1st, and then you would have the full board meeting the next week. A less efficient way to do it would be sort of just to kind of set the meeting as you go along, just whenever you guys are free, but this first
Now,
Wednesday.
why don't we, I would like to recommend to the group, I thank you for that. I think the fact if we can talk about the first Wednesday of every month, and if we talk about it 6:30, Sean, I'm sorry, does 6:30 not work for your work schedule, or it's fine?
It works for my work schedule. I just have a daughter who I'm currently holding, and it's around bedtime. But otherwise, it works, and my wife and I can alternate on relevant days. I just hadn't planned appropriately today, so it's no big deal.
And we'd love to hear her comments. Maybe she could add to our conversation.
Oh, don't get her started, right, Lily? Oh, now you're quiet. Okay, that's
That's always happens when you.
sleep.
That's always
Yeah.
happens. Adam, does it work for you with your work schedule?
Yeah, this works for me.
Maura? Good.
It works, except March 2nd does not work, but the rest of the Wednesdays would.
Okay.
So the next meeting is when we may need to look at a different day.
Okay. Sandra, does it work for you?
Absolutely.
Okay. It's going to be hard. What dates do work for you in that week? It's hard to find when there's other committee meetings, Maura.
Mm-hmm.
Does the first Thursday work in that particular week?
March 3rd does work.
Are there other committees on the 3rd, Jesus?
There are not. That night is free.
Okay. Is it good for everyone else?
Yeah, that should work for me.
Yep, that works.
Okay. We just made Sandra, March 3rd,
Okay, so
Thursday.
the next meeting of this committee is going to be Thursday, March 3rd, and then thereafter, it's going to be the first Wednesday of the month.
That works for us.
Okay, until at least June, and then we'll see.
Yeah, well, we may come at the March meeting or the April meeting and saying we need to meet more frequently, or we're pushing out the June date, the May and June date. Okay. Any other new
Keep in mind
business?
I'm sorry, keep in mind that as far as meeting more frequently, the way the bylaws are currently written, if you meet more frequently, then those extra meetings will sort of be automatically excused for anyone who doesn't want to attend. So if you want to compel people there, the most that you can, I guess, stretching it out might be the better way to do it.
Yeah, I think we'll see when we start our in-depth discussion.
And if I can say one thing unrelated, just because it was mentioned several times, the whole friendly amendment thing, we have seen the need, we've noticed it for some sort of very simple Robert's rules assistance for the board. The easy way would be just to give every member a copy of Robert's rules, but it's 700 pages long, so I don't think that's very effective. So I've been working on a sort of document that will distill just the things that we actually do, the very basics. And then I'm about halfway, 75% of it done. And then we could, help let the, much like the scripts or the resolution template, something like that, we could give it to all the board members so that that knowledge would be with everyone and not necessarily with just one or two people. And we can certainly mention friendly amendments, because as far as Robert's rules are concerned, they are technically a thing, but in such rare circumstances, they might as well not be a thing. And so we're putting that together. So just give us a little bit more time and we'll roll it out. We can even let this committee see it. I was gonna work on it with Rick, unfortunately, but now that's not possible because he's so good at this stuff.
Oh, he was wonderful at this stuff. And he actually gave me, and I have to see if I could find it, a Cliff version of Robert's rules. So if I can find that, Jesus, I may send it to you.
There is an Robert's rules in brief. You can't see it on my camera because of the screen. But
did he have like a motion table? Is that that he gave you?
We have some of those. I find that they're just not super useful. What we're planning is something that's going to be maybe in the neighborhood of 10 pages long, that has a little bit of narrative explanation to it, so that it kind of illustrates what we do and how we do it according to Robert's rules and why it's done that way, as opposed to just a chart that isn't always helpful.
Jesus, do you know if the Borough President's Office is going to be running another workshop? I know they have in the past on that.
They may eventually. The Civic Engagement Commission also periodically runs these kinds of workshops. Right. I've attended several of them, and I've gotten some notes that will go into the document that I'm making. The problem with them is that those are run oftentimes by the parliamentarians of New York, which is very much, they're very well versed at by Robert's rules as it applies to, say, corporate boards or nonprofit boards or things like that. Community boards are slightly different, and some of the things that we do, they are not familiar with. And so until they become super familiar with what we do and can adapt Robert's rules to fit what our needs, they are not as useful as something that's tailored for community boards.
Yeah, but let me see if I have what Rick gave me. It might be helpful also, because he gave me a photocopied document that had this stuff. So I've, at least he will still be with us as we do our deliberations. I feel like he's providing the foundation. Any other new business? Okay, I'm going to call for a motion to adjourn.
I'll make that motion.
Okay, so we're adjourning at 7:35.
Okay.
Don't expect our next meeting to go this quickly, because that's going to be the meeting.
Thanks so much.